Welcome once again to another edition of Quoth the Raven, Lewis Bright Raven. I'm your host, Lewis Bright Raven, 29-year veteran writer, illustrator, and editor of comics, science fiction, fantasy, horror, and role-playing games. Tonight is our regular, I guess it's our regular night again, for movie or TV chat, and we are talking about the classic films Cat People, the original film from 1942, Curse of the Cat People from 1944, and then the 1982 remake of Cat People as well. If you give me a second here. Alrighty, we're just waiting to see if anybody comes in real quick. And it doesn't seem like they are. Okay, but it's a big deal. Cat People, 1942, directed by Jacques Turner, written by DeWitt Bodine, produced by Val Luton, starring Simone Simon, Kent Smith, Tom Conway, Gene Randolph, and Jack Holt. The production company was RKO Radio Pictures, distributed by RKO Radio Pictures. It was originally released on December 5th, 1942 at the Rialto Theater, and then national release on December 25th, 1942. It has a running time of 73 minutes, or for an hour and 13 minutes. What it's about: at the Central Park Zoo in New York City, Serbian-born fashion illustrator Irena Dubrovna, portrayed by Simone Simon, makes sketches of a Black Panther. She catches the attention of a marine engineer, Oliver Reed, played by Ken Smith, who strikes up a conversation. Irena invites him to her apartment for tea. At her apartment, Oliver is intrigued by a statue of a medieval warrior on horseback impaling a large cat with his sword. Irena informs Oliver that the figure is King John of Serbia and that the cat represents evil. According to legend, long ago, the Christian residents of her home village gradually turned to witchcraft and devil worship after being enslaved by Mamelukes. When King John drove the Mamelukes out and saw what the villagers had become, he had them all killed. However, the wisest and most wicked of the villagers escaped into the mountains. Oliver is dismissive of this legend, even though Irena clearly takes it quite seriously. Shortly thereafter, Oliver buys her a kitten, but upon meeting her, it hisses. Irena suggests they go to the pet shop to exchange it. When they enter the shop, the animals go wild in her presence, and Irena becomes uneasy. Irena gradually reveals to Oliver that she believes she is descended from those cat people from her village, and that she will transform into a panther if aroused to passion. Despite this, Oliver blows it off and asks her to marry him, and for whatever reason, she agrees. However, during the dinner after their wedding at the Belgrade, the Serbian restaurant, a cat-like woman walks over and addresses Irena as Moja Sestra, which means my sister. Irena then never consummates the marriage, fearful of the consequences. Oliver is patient with her at first, but eventually persuades her to see if psychiatrist Dr. Lewis Judd, played by Tom Conway. Judd tries to convince her that her fears stem from childhood traumas. Meanwhile, Irena is unhappy to discover that Oliver has confided in his assistant, Alice Moore, portrayed by Jane Randolph. Alice confesses to Oliver that she loves him. While Irena chances to see Oliver and Alice seated together at a restaurant, she follows Alice home. Just as Alice hears a menacing sound, a bus pulls up and she boards it. Soon afterwards, a groundskeeper discovers several freshly killed sheep. The paw prints leading away from the dead sheep turn into imprints of a woman's shoes. Irena returns to her apartment looking disheveled and is exhausted. She is shown shortly afterwards weeping in the bathtub. Irena dreams of Dr. Judd dressed up as King John, speaking of the key. Later, she steals the key to the panther's cage in Central Park. Irena, Oliver, and Alice visit a museum, and Irena is angered when the two virtually ignore her. That evening, when Alice decides to use the basement swimming pool of her apartment building, she is stalked by an animal. When Alice screams for help, Irena appears, turning on the lights, and says she is looking for Oliver. Alice later finds her bathrobe torn to shreds. After an appointment with Dr. Judd, Irina tells Oliver that she is no longer afraid, but Oliver tells her it's too late. He has realized that he loves Alice and intends to divorce Irina. Later at work, Oliver and Alice are cornered by a snarling animal. Oliver and Alice manage to get out of the building, but not before smelling Irina's perfume. Alice calls Judd to warn him to stay away from Irina, but he hangs up the phone when Irina arrives for her appointment with him. Judd kisses Irina passionately, which results in her transformation into the Panther, who attacks and kills him. When Oliver and Alice arrive at Judd's office, Irina slips away and goes to the zoo. There she opens up the Panther's cage with the stolen key and is struck down by the escaping Panther, who in turn gets accidentally run down and killed by a car. Next to the Panther's cage, Oliver and Alice find a dead Panther lying on the ground. Oliver says, "She never lied to us." And that's kind of how it ends. What do I think about this? Well, there are two fields of thoughts in this film. Some believe that it's a little bit schlocky and pedestrian, that the acting is campy and the story tries hard to be melodramatic, but not hard enough, to paraphrase a popular review of the film back when it was first released. The other view is that it's more of a psychological thriller and that it expects the audience to fill in some of the visual gaps instead of the transformation to the grotesque and marauding characters for visual impact on audiences. I tend to lean more towards the latter sentiments. Yes, it is campy in its own way, but this is 1942 filmmaking. The tone of the film is not campy. It's quite serious and grim throughout. And the film is most certainly not for children or audience who don't want to think, because this is definitely a psychological horror film rather than a shock story. Those who claim the latter simply looked at the surface of the film and have really watching it with a closed mindset. I do understand, however, why Simon kind of got bashed as the lead. She doesn't really pull off a feline-esque persona. However, her performance, given how the story is written and what there is to work with, is reasonably there. It's reasonably solid. Would have been more successful with an even darker, more violent presentation? I'm not so sure what it would have in its era, and we will have to consider this later in this episode, we talk about the other films as well. The film was good enough to earn a Hugo nomination for Best Dramatic Presentation Short Form, but it lost to Disney's Bambi. It did receive, it's not rated because of the era it was made in. This film, if it was made today, shot the way it shot, everything, it'd probably get a PG-13, maybe a PG, hard PG or a PG-13. I give it a rating of 4 out of 5 stars. Our next film is Curse of the Cat People from 1944. This film was directed by Gunther Van Fritsch and Robert Wise, written by DeWitt Bodine, produced by Val Lewton. It stars Simone Simon, Kent Smith, Jane Randolph, Ann Carter, Julia Dean, and Elizabeth Russell. I put Liz Russell just to fit it into the screen set, but the full name is Elizabeth Russell. The production company is RKO Pictures, distributed again by RKO Pictures, and this release date was March 2nd, 1944. Its running time, 1 hour and 10 minutes. What it's about: following the death of his wife, Irina Dubrovna, engineer Oliver Reed has remarried his former co-worker, Alice. The couple now have a 6-year-old daughter, Amy, and they reside in Tarrytown, New York. Oliver worries about Amy's extreme introversion and predilection to fantasy, as the behavior reminds him of Irina. And of course, that kind of, they don't want to think about that. It kind of freaks them all out. And the madness drove her to death. At the urging of her parents, Amy attempts to make friends with neighborhood children, but they spurn her. While walking through a neighborhood, Amy pauses in front of a large house, which the other children claim is inhabited by a witch. An elderly woman's voice beckons Amy from a second-floor window, and she follows. From the window, the woman drops a handkerchief and a ring to the ground. Amy takes it, though the hanky is promptly snatched away from her by Barbara Farron, the elderly woman's detected daughter. She races home to her family, and there the Reed's butler, Edward, tells Amy that the ring appears to be a wishing ring, and suggests that she make a wish to it. In the family garden, Amy simply wishes for a friend. Moments later, a wind encircles her, and she begins frolicking with what Oliver and Edward observe as an imaginary friend. The next day, Amy goes back to the house to return the ring. She's met inside by Barbara's eccentric elderly mother, a former stage actress named Julia. Julia tells Amy that her real daughter is dead and that Barbara is a spy, posing as her daughter. Amy looks on as Julia dramatically reenacts the legend of the Headless Horseman of Sleepy Hollow, but the story is cut short when Edward comes to retrieve Amy. After Amy leaves, Barbara chastises Julia for the way she treats her, but Julia continues to insist that Barbara is an imposter and that her daughter died when she was 6 years old. That night, Amy has a nightmare about the Headless Horseman. She is calmed, however, by the maternal presence of her new friend, manifesting as a shadow, which sings a song to her. In the morning, Amy finds a photograph of Irina, whom she identifies as her mysterious new friend. Alice quickly hides the photograph. On Christmas Eve, Amy quietly slips outside during a family gathering to give Irina a gift in the garden. She subsequently visits the Farron house on Christmas Day and gifts Julia a ring, which delights her. This enrages Barbara, whose gifts have always been rejected by Julia. Barbara vows to murder Amy should she ever return to the house. A short time later, Amy finds another photograph, this time of Oliver and Irina together, and insists that she knows her. Oliver dismisses this as one of Amy's fantasies and punishes her for her seeming lies. As Amy sobs in her bedroom, she is visited by Irina, who tells her that she must depart, explaining that she is interfering with Amy's relationship with her father. Amy begs Irina to stay, but she disappears. Amy wanders outside, searching for Irina. Shortly thereafter, Oliver and Alice realize Amy has left the house. Outside, Amy becomes caught in a blizzard as she wanders through the country back roads. She eventually seeks shelter at the Farrons' home. Julia takes her in, but attempts to hide her upstairs, fearing Barbara will harm Amy out of jealousy. A panicked Julia suffers a heart attack while climbing the stairs and subsequently dies from her heart attack. Barbara appears and menacingly approaches Amy. Frightened, Amy invokes Irina, who replaces Barbara's image. In other words, kind of like she kind of possesses Barbara, I guess you could say. And as she does so, she and Barbara embrace. This disarms Barbara, who in turn returns the child's embrace. Moments later, Oliver and the police arrive at the house. Oliver embraces Amy, and the two of them return home. On the porch, Oliver agrees to accept his daughter's imaginary companions, and Irina, watching them from the garden, disappears as they enter the house. And scene and film. When is a sequel not really a sequel? Well, this film right here. Yes, the story is a continuance from the 1942 movie, but it really has nothing to do with the cat people, as it's more about the relationship between the ghost of Irina and Amy Reed than anything to do with the curse or of cat people. That having been said, because it's not really a sequel per se, you don't have to have seen the first film to understand this film, and we can watch it on its own as its own entity. One key historical point about this film is that it marked two directorial debuts. Gunther von Fritsch had only directed short films up to that point, so the film had marked his feature debut. Unfortunately, he was behind schedule, and something is missing. Let me see if I can... Yeah, okay. Just give me a second here. There we go. As I said, he was behind schedule, and resulting in that was Director Robert Wise came in and then became to replace him to finish the film shooting schedule, and that made for Robert Wise's directorial debut as well. I'm trying to see what happened to my screen here. Okay. All right. Now, part of the problem with this film, if you want to call it a problem, was the reason it was called Curse of the Cat People instead of what it was supposed to be, which was Amy and her friend. Which is what the producer Lawson wanted. RKO Productions wanted to cash in on the success of the first film, Cat People, and they basically insisted that they do this, especially since it had most of the same cast members in the show. So they had to do it that way. This led to changes made in the movie, re-edits and reshoots, including scenes that really had nothing to do with what was going on. Like there's a scene in the film where boys are chasing a black cat around. That was to basically say, yeah, there's a cat involved in the film. It has nothing to do with what's going on. And a few other things as well that they wanted in the film that really had nothing to do with the story. And as a result, key elements of the plot had to be edited out to make room for these scenes. So the story gets a little bit jarred and maybe a little bit not explained as to how Irina's ghost is still following them and everything. So that's part of what's wrong with the film, if there's anything really wrong with the film. And that having been said, however, most people who really like this film do understand what it's about. And it has received much acclaim historically, and justifiably so. It is a psychological thriller, this time about the psychology of a child and the interactions between children and adults, while wrapped within a ghost story, which actually makes this a stronger film between this one and its predecessor, and has been used in college psychology courses for decades. I think Anna Carter does a fine job in the role of Amy. Child actors of this era were working under massively different, often unsafe conditions compared to the Hollywood of today, particularly females. If you go back and you read history of Shirley Temple or Julie Garland or other women of that era, you will see the kind of psychological and emotional and physical abuses they took at the hands of the studios. This film was also not rated. I give it 4 out of 5 stars. And finally, we have Cat People from 1982. This film was directed by Paul Schrader, written by Alan Ormsby and Paul Schrader, based on the Cat People idea from DeWitt Bodine. It's produced by Charles W. Fries, and it stars Natasha Kinski, Malcolm McDowell, John Hurd, and Annette O'Toole. Production company is, again, RKO Pictures, but this time it's distributed by Universal Pictures. It was released on April 2nd of 1982, and it has the longest running of all these films at 1 hour and 58 minutes. What this is about, it's a loose remake of the 1942 Cat People, and I do mean loose. It goes in its own thing. Starting with a prologue set in an undisclosed primitive human settlement, a sacrificial maiden is being tied to a tree. A black panther approaches and rests its paws on her, and then the scene fades to black. Another girl with feline features approaches with a similar big cat inside a cave without incurring the cat's attack. We then see a close-up of the woman's face as it segues into the future to that of similarly featured Irina Gallier, who travels to present-day New Orleans from Canada to reconnect with her brother Paul. Irina was raised in foster care after they were each orphaned. Paul spent his childhood in psych wards and is now involved in a church and lives with his Creole housekeeper, who's just known as Female. So she's now in connection and with her brother Paul. That night, a prostitute named Ruthie walks into a rundown motel to meet John, and instead finds a black leopard that mauls her foot. The police and zoologists Oliver, Alice, and Joe capture this panther. Meanwhile, Irina wakes to find that Paul is missing. Female guesses that he went to the mission and urges Irina to enjoy New Orleans on her own. So Irina moves out of town. She visits the zoo, and she is drawn to the newly captured leopard and stays after closing hours. She is then discovered by Oliver, the zoo's curator, who takes her to dinner and offers her a job in the zoo's gift shop. Irina reveals that she is a virgin in conversation with Alice, who shares a romantic history and, in fact, is still in love with Oliver, and sees Irina as a rival. One day, shortly thereafter these events take place, the captured leopard tears Joe's arm off during a routine cage cleaning, and he bleeds to death. Oliver resolves to euthanize the cat, only to find it missing. Inside its cage lies a pile of melted flesh, like the one found by the motel prostitute. Paul then turns up and makes sexual advances towards Irina. Irina flees, flags down a police car, and has second thoughts about turning Paul in, but a police dog catches a strong scent from the house, and a detective is called in. In Paul's basement, police find shackles, bones, and remains of dozens of corpses, and they come to the conclusion that Paul is a serial killer who feeds on his corpses to a captive panther or leopard, and they call in Oliver and Alice to inspect and investigate the scene. On the run from Paul, Irina takes refuge in a frustrated romance with Oliver, fearing the consequences of physical intimacy. However, Paul finds Irina again and explains that their shared werecat heritage, thus revealing himself as the escaped murderous leopard. Mating with a human transforms a werecat into a leopard, and only by killing another human can you regain human form. He tells her that their parents were siblings because werecats are ancestrally incestuous, and only sex between werecats prevents such transformations. He resumes then his sexual advances, hoping Irina will then accept their situation, their predicament, but she refuses. Paul then transforms and attacks Oliver and is shot by Alice. Oliver starts a necropsy on the cat. That's, basically an autopsy on the cat. However, a green gas emanates from the surgical cut, and the human arm and hand reach up from within the cat's corpse. Before he can document this, the leopard melts into a pool of green slime. Conversely, Irina then stalks and nearly attacks Alice twice. She later does have sex with Oliver and transforms into the leopard, but she flees, sparing his life, and she ends up later trapped on a bridge by police. Oliver arrives in time to see her jump off the bridge. And remember, she's still the cat. Realizing where she is headed, he confronts Irina at a secluded lake house. She's regained human form by killing Female, the house's caretaker. Irina tells Oliver she did not kill him because she loves him and begs him to kill her. When Oliver refuses, she begs him then to make love to her again so that she can transform and be with her own kind, meaning the cats. Oliver ties Irina naked to the bedpost by her arms and legs to restrain her and has sex with her. Sometime later, they cut. It's like afterwards. Oliver is again with a one-sided relationship with Alice. It's not really affectionate, but they're together. He stops at the cage holding the recaptured panther, which is now Irina, who is now permanently trapped in her cat form. Oliver reaches through the bars and casually hand feeds and strokes the now docile panther's neck. And that's the end of the film. I did not see this film when it first aired in the theaters. I was only 10 when it came out, so I got to see it when it aired on cable a few years later. It was one of the first erotic horror films I've seen. I'm thinking I saw this around 85, around age 12 or 13. Natasha Kinski was both demure and alluring, and certainly captured the minds of men, young and old, with this film. It is one of the most iconic erotic horror films of its era. And Kinski really does carry the film. Malcolm McDowell does a nice job and does give a fairly respectable performance as Paul. And Annette O'Toole does a fair job in her limited role as Alice as well. John Hurt is good, but the film's sensual, more lurid nature than its original source material really needs to rely on Kinski to make it work. And Kinski is just something to behold. She never overacts in the movie. She never steps wrong. She never seems ridiculous. She just steps on screen and convincingly underplays a leopard. Now, Hurt is also good, and he never seems in the grip of an ordinary sexual passion, and instead seems to possess one of those obsessions that men are willing and often called upon to die for. The best yet saddest part is the ending. We expect Irina to be killed, and she ends up remaining at the zoo in her panther form, leopard form, whichever it is, apparently never to become human again. And that's a crazy ending, to be honest. The film captures the old traditions of the original 1942 film, but it's modernized for the 80s with a bit more darkness and erotic tension. And that's probably the best we could have expected from the film, to be honest. This was one of my favorite films as a teenager, and it was interesting to revisit it after not seeing it for probably, it's probably been 20 years, but really seen it and watched it after 30 years, I'd say. I think the last time I saw it and really paid attention to it was probably when I was 18 or 19. So that'd be like 30 years ago. It still holds up, largely again on the strength of Kinski's performance. But it doesn't hold as strong a place in my heart as other horror films of the era, and that's probably because it doesn't seem to get the TV airings that so many of its contemporaries of the day seem to. Films like American Werewolf in London, The Howling, and The Hunger are what I mean by this. Still, it is an 80s horror classic, and I highly recommend it. Rated R, it is 4 out of 5 stars. And that is the show for tonight. Tomorrow, we will have Booktober. In the morning or early afternoon. And tomorrow's book is Swamp Thing, Roots of Terror, the deluxe edition, featuring individual stories by a variety of creators, as you can see on the screen: Len Wein, Kelly Jones, Tom King, Jason Fabach, Brian Azzarello, Greg Capullo, and more. And tomorrow I will let you guys know what the rest of next week's schedule, starting tomorrow, is. But until then, if you liked what you saw today, or you like what's going on with the network, I'd really appreciate it if you think others might maybe. Please hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons to continue to get support from my channel. As always, I thank you for watching and for your support. If you want to reach out to me on social media, I can be found on Facebook at Lewis.BrightRaven, at Twitter at LewisBrightRave2. You can see some of my artwork at deviantart.com/BrightRaven, You've been watching Quoth the Raven, Lewis Bright Raven, exclusively on YouTube. If you have questions, comments, you want to request a commission, anything like that, Quoth the Raven, LBR72@gmail.com is the place to try and reach me at. If I don't get back to you within an hour, or not an hour, a day or two, I should say, then try lewisbrightraven@yahoo.com. That's all for now. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good night, everyone.